Tonight, Jeffrey Schaub tells us the oil spill cleanup, though, is far from over in some places around the bay. Jeffrey.
But Dana, I think there's a misnomer when it comes to the oil spill is being completely cleaned up. Because what we see is that is not the case everywhere we go. We went back to a place that we visited right after the oil spill last month, and it's still a mess. 1 month after the oil spill, what has historically been a bird sanctuary here in Richmond is still filthy. Are you angry about this?
Oh, I'm totally furious. I'm so tired of... I couldn't be more exasperated.
George McRae is an environmentalist and a bird lover. For over a month, he and others in the East Bay have been crying out to the Coast Guard and Contra Costa County leaders because the Richmond shoreline here is still soaked with oil, and it's obvious that very little has been done to clean it up.
This is absolutely fresh. It's completely fresh. And it's
really thick and...
It's thick and it's tarry and...
Just like it was in the beginning.
As it was exactly in the beginning.
Yeah.
The only difference is that they've cut the grass that was obviously oiled, but they have not done any of the cleanup along the actual marsh area itself.
Come a little closer here. I want to show you something. Not only is the oil still on the surface, it's just below it too. I pulled up this rock. This is all oil in there, mixed in with the sand and sediment. Black as tar. Look at that. Back on November 9th, we followed George out to the sanctuary area to view oiled birds, including this egret. They all later died, as have thousands of other birds Bay Area-wide. The Coast Guard promised they would eventually clean up this shoreline, but today they could not explain why it had not been cleaned up yet. It's been over a month now.
It's about 5 weeks.
Would you call this a cleanup?
Absolutely not. No, this hasn't been touched at all.
What would you call this?
I would call this just sort of like a cover-up, if anything. I mean, it's certainly not a cleanup. I would call it just sort of a trim, a cursory trim, like sort of a brief visit. But it's absolutely, it's disgraceful. This is a wildlife sanctuary.
So it would appear for the time being, Dana, that not every single stretch of shoreline around San Francisco Bay is going to be completely cleaned up of this oil, and that it could be there for a very long time.
Long-term impacts on birds, fish, and other wildlife can be hard to measure. But a UC Davis study looking at the effects of marine fuel on sea otters suggests exposure to oil makes them more vulnerable to disease. And then there's the example everyone knows, the Exxon Valdez. Scientists found 15 years after the spill, some wildlife still suffered, and beaches still held reservoirs of oil.
The potential effects of oil on organisms lasts for a while, and teasing out those effects could take a while also.
Especially when the actual oil that's spilled into the bay is bunker fuel.
Well, it's basically toxic waste.
He's environmental activist Denny Larson.
That's what got dumped into the bay.
It's fuel that he says carries a heavy load of toxins called PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons.
Toxins that are in that, like PAHs, heavy metals, they all get concentrated in the bunker fuel. It's some of the dirtiest, most dangerous toxins you can imagine.
I'm going to uncap this. And when we opened a cup and looked inside at a sample collected from the bay...
And the smell of it's very, very strong.
So how toxic is the fuel spilled from the Cosco Busan? With Larson's help, CBS 5 packaged a sample and sent it to a lab for analysis of PAHs. What do you expect to see coming back?
I would expect that we would find a lot of very toxic PAHs. It means that the problem's not going to be cleaned up in the next week or the next month or the next year.